Welcome to Sports Management Podcast, where you will hear interesting sports management professionals share their stories, experiences, and passion for the sports management industry. I am your host, Marcus Philipsson. Welcome to episode 115 of Sports Management Podcast. Before we start, I have checked the podcast statistics and 40% of you who listen to this do not subscribe to the podcast. So please do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. It will help the show grow, and the bigger the show, the bigger the guests. Thank you. Now, today's guest is Manvi Mittal. She's a PR professional and currently works as the Account Supervisor at Small Girls PR. She's also the host for Females in Motorsport podcast, and it is motorsports that we will talk about today. We spoke about how Manvi got into motorsports, the rapid rise of Formula E, sustainability and motorsports, how Drive to Survive helped gain more female fans, the Females in Motorsport platform, and much more. Manvi Mittal, welcome to Sports Management Podcast.
Hi, thank you so much for inviting me, Marcus. I'm so excited to be here and chat all about all the amazing things we're going to talk about today in the world of motorsport.
Yes, for sure. And for the people who don't know who you're doing many things. You are involved with Females in Motorsports, which is, I guess, where we put a lot of this discussion, but you're also a PR professional. You have worked in different industries, beauty, fashion, luxury, retail. So how did you get into motorsport?
Yeah, absolutely. So my story is not super unique. I think a lot of people, especially young women, have gotten into motorsport in the past few years, thanks to F1's one of their greatest marketing channels, Netflix Drive to Survive. So my story goes a little bit before that. One of my very close friends in India, she's been watching Formula One for years now, since I've known her. And she would always kind of talk about some of the drivers and the races. So I was always familiar, but I never paid attention, to be completely honest. And then when COVID happened, as everybody was going through different emotions, different downs in their life, I found myself bored out of my mind. And my friend told me, why don't you watch the show? I think you'll really get into it. And, it's a sport that I think you will really enjoy. And I've not always been someone who's really been inclined to follow sport. I like watching tennis, sometimes golf, because my father's really into watching golf. But that show really sucked me into all the drama that happens in Formula One. Now, I don't know how accurate it was, but it was definitely a great marketing tool to get people interested in talking. And it's funny because the first season that I saw was 2018, but I watched it in 2020. And so I started following F1 after that. And then, as we all know, 2021, or for anyone who watches Formula One knows, 2021 was an incredible season for Formula One because we had one of the best title fights in the past decade between Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen. So I think it was a coincidence of many great things. That's how my passion for motorsport really began. And then, fast forward 2023, I think it's become something that's really, really important to me. And that's how I ended up at Females in Motorsport.
Yeah, and to your point, Formula One has just exploded globally. Drive to Survive is a big part of that. And you can see the impact because the first year, you mentioned 2018, the first season, not all teams wanted to take part. And then after that year, they saw how much buzz it was around it. And now, of course, all teams and everyone wants to be a part of this.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's interesting because if you compare Drive to Survive season 1 and season 5, at least from my perspective, I think it's now teams are starting to use this show as their own marketing tools and trying to, it's become more marketing, less storytelling. And I'm quoting this from an article I just read yesterday on the Jalopnik, that how Drive to Survive has become a marketing tool now. It's gone from something that teams feared to something that teams want to utilize. So it's interesting. And especially at this time when, that title fight is over. We don't have anything of that excitement anymore. I still love Formula One. I always will. But that excitement is not there. But I think the good thing is that Drive to Survive did, especially for me, is that it helped spark my interest in other motorsport. So in Females in Motorsport, for example, we talk about all motorsport, not just Formula One. We talk about feeder series, F1 Academy, of course, GT racing, IndyCar, NASCAR, everything. So I think that was something that was very advantageous to other series, because that spillover from Formula One to be like, okay, this year is not that interesting. Where can I watch some closer racing? That's helped increase audiences for IndyCar and other series that actually have better racing.
That's interesting. And also, as a Swede, Marcus Ericsson is in IndyCar, so I've been following that a little bit more than I have before. A lot of interest in, as you say, not only F1, but in more motorsports.
Yeah, and IndyCar is very dramatic. I think there's a lot going on at any point during the year. Formula One is interesting because I like to think they like to hold their cards very close to their chest, which is understandable given the scale and the money and the investments going behind Formula One. But I think so many other series are a little bit more accessible for fans. And I think other series like IndyCar, for example, like you mentioned, is doing absolutely amazing work to actually bring fans into the fold. And I think another example is Formula E. I had the opportunity to attend a Formula E race and actually visit the paddock and be able to meet the teams and everything. And that experience is something that I don't think is really something you get everywhere. It's very rare, I would say, in Formula One to be able to get that access from someone like me who's not really been in the industry for very long. I don't have, that kind of network, anything like that. So I think Formula E and IndyCar and other series are taking a page out of that playbook to see, okay, what can we do to make the sport more accessible? Because that's what Formula One is not being able to do.
Interesting. And I think that Formula One is, most people know what it is, but Formula E and the concept. So can you please elaborate on that a little bit? What exactly is Formula E and how does it work?
Yeah, so Formula E is a bit of a new series. I think they just hit 9 seasons, if I'm not wrong. And their whole ethos was around they want to do single-seater car racing. They want to travel around the world, but they want to do it in the most environmentally conscious way possible. So they have been net zero, for example, since day one. And that's a goal. And to put things in perspective, Formula One is trying to reach that goal in 2030. Of course, Formula One has decades of history and, all those things in its arsenal. But I think Formula E, what they're really trying to do is trying to create a lot of excitement in racing, but staying true to its roots around being sustainable and environment friendly and things like that. And a lot of people who are familiar with Formula One drivers, I would say you would enjoy Formula E because you will see some familiar names who have driven in Formula One and are now in Formula E. So there's some crossover which can make it more exciting for fans. But if I had to sum up Formula E in like a sentence, I would say it's a more competitive, much more closer racing and environmentally conscious version of Formula One. Of course, the engines are different. They're electric. Formula One is hybrid. So avoiding all those nitty-gritties from like a larger lens, I would say if you're debating if you should watch a Formula E race, you should absolutely watch a Formula E race. Because when I went to the race in Portland, just to give you, just to put things in perspective, there were about 400 plus overtakes in that one race. That is absolutely unheard of in like Formula One. Like, I don't remember the last time I've ever seen a race that had 400 plus overtakes. So it's very exciting. Anything can change over the course of a couple of laps. Drivers have to be careful about energy conservation because it's all battery powered and electric powered. So it's different, but it's a very easy transition, I would say, from Formula One to Formula E to be as a fan.
Interesting. And overtakes are a big part, and it's something that's very interesting and exciting. And for example, you mentioned 400 plus overtakes in Formula E. I mean, if you're watching Formula One, Monaco might not be one. It's such a tight race. So interesting comparison.
Yeah, I think this past year's Monza Grand Prix, I think it was around 100 plus, which also people were considering a lot. And Monza is one track where I do think because it's so fast, like things can really go either way. We've had some incredible races the past 3 or 4 years, to be fair. But 400 plus overtakes is really unheard of. And even in Formula E, I think the average amount of overtakes in Formula E is usually 200 plus. And I think they were expecting 250 plus in Portland, but ended up being 400 plus.
Let's talk about women in motorsports. So I mean, there are different ways to be involved, right? You can be a driver, you can be a strategist, you can be a mechanic, you can be some type of leadership position. So how has the interest for women to be involved in motorsports changed? And talk a little bit around the women in motorsports at large.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think it's before I, go into anything, I think it's important to highlight that motorsport and especially Formula One and a lot of other series, I don't want to especially call it Formula One actually, but there is a very serious diversity problem, and that spans across race, gender, sexual orientation, everything. And I think even if you speak to people who work within Formula One, they would agree with that, especially the younger workforce. And I think it spans across different motorsport series. It's not just, a Formula One thing, but I think we talk about Formula One the most because it has so much impact over a global scale. Not to say that there aren't women in leadership positions. Yes, there are, and that's really great to see. And I definitely agree that there's more and more women who are interested in working in the industry. It's funny because just a couple of weeks ago, I spoke with somebody who works at IndyCar, and she was on track to work in aerodynamics and totally different kind of career and industry. And then she just fell in love with motorsport over the past couple of years, and now she works at IndyCar. So I think there's definitely more and more women joining the workforce, which is great. But I think a really important thing to tackle before we can talk about women in motorsport is like how to retain the women who are already in the workforce. So, there's so many policies and things like that have been placed in all these series. Like, for example, Formula One has a 2-week summer shutdown. And this is something I spoke with somebody who works within Formula One, is that, that 2-week summer shutdown in August. August is a very busy time to travel. It's very expensive. For low-income families to be able to travel around that time is not really possible. And Formula One is not, not everybody's paid the same way. So, yes, of course, leaders can probably afford that, but not everyone can. And then, because it's a global sport, you're not really able to go back visit your family and things like that. And all those things end up impacting women and people of color the most. So I think just, revisiting policies like that is probably one of the most important things to increase diversity in the sport and, just having more women in leadership because, just to have more diversity of thought, you don't really know what's going on, what the problems are for women until you ask them. And I think some series are doing it well, some series are not doing as well. But I think what's really great overall is that everybody wants to see change, which, is positive and is something that we can work towards. To answer your question, I do think that there's more women coming into motorsport. Of course, there's, I would say I'm an example of that. I don't really work in the industry, but it's something that, I'm very interested in and very passionate about. And a lot of people that I have worked with within the community, whether it's on my podcast or Females in Motorsport, they're all women. And, when I first started working with Females in Motorsport, that was, I think, November 2022 is when I did my first ever story with them. And I was a little bit concerned. I was like, what if, I don't have enough women to speak with? I didn't know what the landscape looked like. But the more and more I work in the industry, I see that there are many women in the industry. Yes, there's still definitely a lot of problems, but I really like to see more women entering the workforce. And the fandom is increasing, right? So I think when fandom increases, hopefully we can see a change in the workforce as well.
Yes, I read that the female Formula One fans has increased from 8 to 40%.
Yeah, it's incredible. It's an incredible amount. It's, there's obviously a lot of things that have gone behind it. Of course, Drive to Survive is one, but I would like to think that Drive to Survive was a domino in the entire process. I think Drive to Survive happened, and then we saw a big boom in the creator economy and the podcast economy and Formula One and motorsport in general, which has really helped retain fans, I would say, because, like I was saying before, after 2021, the series and the seasons have not been that exciting to watch. But creators and podcasters, then writers are working so hard just to, find different stories and find the interesting tidbits to keep fans engaged. And I think they're doing a great job. So I think that has been a really great player to keep that number as high as it is.
What about female drivers? How is the comparison?
That's a great question. So it's interesting because, there's the first stage for any driver is karting. You start with karting. And if you actually look at the numbers, men and women, or like young girls and young boys, when they start karting, the numbers are pretty similar. But as they advance, as they go into their teens, the numbers for women and young girls drops off very quickly. And, there's this mindset that with drivers, you always think of men, right? Formula One has not had a female driver in decades and will probably not have one for many, many years from now. And, even if you look at Formula E, yes, has had a couple of female drivers and they have 3 so far, which is great because considering the age of the series is only 9 years, but they don't have one, this year or next year. And, looking at even IndyCar, like Indy 500, I think we only had one woman this year, Catherine Legg. So, it is, if you look at the numbers comparing to now, it's obviously very, very bleak. And there's many things that go behind it. And I think number one is that motorsport, we all know, is very, very expensive. So sponsors play a huge, huge role in being able to get women and young girls to the finish line of actually having a seat in a car the following year. And because of a bunch of elements that go behind, media coverage for women is so low. For example, they don't get exposure. If you don't get exposure, brands don't get to know you, fans don't get to know you, then why would brands want to sponsor you? Of course, obviously for brands, it's not charity. They need to see some ROI behind it. And I can see that from a PR perspective, of course, like for a brand, it only makes sense to put in money behind something that they can see an ROI with. So there's a bunch of things in play here, but I think sponsorship is very important to keep in mind. And I think F1 Academy, for example, is something that we can touch on this year. It's had an interesting start. It was criticized very heavily in the beginning because it was not broadcast, and not broadcasting a series has very, very serious repercussions, right? Like women don't get exposure, like I was saying before. And if they don't get exposure, it's just, what are they going to do next year? How are they going to get the money? So from that perspective, I think now that F1 Academy will be broadcast starting their series finale this year, I think we can see some big changes happening. And W Series, for example, was, I think really pivotal in making that change for female drivers and giving them that platform to actually talk about their issues and things like that. So I think that's really key, sponsorships. And the second thing I think is, and I'm really trying to change that with females in motorsport, is to involve women in conversation, especially drivers. And, not to just ask them about what they need to get a seat, but also just talk to them about engineering, just talk to them about regular driver things that we talk to men about. Because I think it's important to not just focus on the diversity aspect for women, but also realize that they are experts in their field too. So let's talk to them about that. Because if you see them as an expert from a brand perspective, you are more inclined to sponsor them as well. So, there's a few things that go in play and need to go hand in hand to actually get to a point where we see women like a 50-50 split in a series like Formula One or Formula E or, IndyCar and things like that. There are series that have 50-50 split, like Extreme E is one of them that has 50-50 split, which is amazing. But I think we're a long way to go at the moment.
I work in ice hockey, grew up playing ice hockey. When I was young, there was not enough women's teams, so the women played on the boys' teams. Now it's a different story. How is that if you said karting, when they start, they are similar ages. So is there always one girls and boys race together, or are there different women's and boys racing leagues? And is that something that could encourage more girls to go into racing, or how is your opinion on that?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. Yes, to answer your initial part of your question, yes, they do, they race together, they race at the same time. And I think if you ask most female drivers, they say that they would prefer to race, with men. I think, of course, a lot of different sports have different biological needs, different, men and women have different bodies. We know that. So, it can differ when it comes to the sport. Motorsport, I would say, is one of those unique sports that a lot of drivers see and believe that women and men can absolutely race together at the same time. Now, where it gets tricky is, how we were talking about W Series and F1 Academy, which are female-only feeder series. So there has been some debate about, why don't we just help women get into Formula 2 or Formula 3 or Indy NXT, which is the Indy feeder series, to help them race with men? So I think it's an age-old question, and it's not one I'm able to answer because, I'm not a driver. I don't really understand all the skills that are needed. But from my perspective, I think it really, I think it's a two-pronged approach, honestly. I think it's important to have the female-only series to ensure that women are continuing to develop and continuing to train, because at this point, we are not where we need to be to have, to give women an equal platform to be in series with men. So I think we need both things. I think we need female-only series, but we also need brands and sponsors and organizations like IndyCar, Formula One, and FIA to be able to encourage women to join series overall. And I think, if you look at F1 Academy, the purpose is for them to get to Formula One, right? So they can drive with all drivers. So then we can have both men and female drivers. So that's the purpose. And I think I don't disagree that I do think men and women can race at the same time. I think they're absolutely equally capable. So it's tricky because, it comes to the point where it's like, okay, then why not just focus on that? But I don't think we're there yet where we have the luxury to only focus on that.
I think that's really, really interesting because I've had guests on this podcast. We have talked about chess and we talked about physical differences on playing chess. And now we're talking motorsports, and it is physically demanding. And it's, all the G-force and everything that you need to do to maneuver the car. So in my opinion, there is an argument for physical differences between men and women. And that's why I asked you if there is a women's only league in racing and so forth. But I mean, if the women prefer to race with men and if that's something that they can do competitively, then of course.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great point. And I used to feel the same way. I used to think that, it is physically demanding. There's G-forces and everything. But I think motorsport is also unique where your own body also kind of has an impact on your speed to an extent, like your weight and all those things. So I think that, it can really go either way. And yeah, I think, you and I can play the guessing game, but I think it really depends on like the female drivers and what they want. And it seems like most of them are, very happy to be racing with other men. And, we've seen women excel in that. Like, I think, so many female drivers in the past, we've had some incredible drivers who've been able to prove that, no, we are there. It's not that, women are at the back of the series, all the time. Jamie Chadwick, for example, is in the Indy NXT series this year in the feeder series for IndyCar, and she's doing incredibly well. I think there's 13 rookies this year. She's one of them, and she's, I think, fourth among all the rookies. So she's up there, and she's doing really great, and she's an incredible driver. So, I think it just depends on that. I think it's, women are not always given the resources to excel. I think that's the biggest issue. And I always talk about, it's not always equality, it's more about equity. Because we're not on the same playing field. They're not on the same playing field. We don't have the same resources. So then, and I don't think we need more resources, but I think drivers need different resources to excel in the same area. So I think that's where it gets a little bit tricky. And, I don't think like, it's really more about, let's say like driver A gets more track time, more money. Driver B gets less track time, less money. Driver A will always excel. So, it comes down to those things as well. This is an analogy that was explained to be by a female driver. So, yeah, there's a few things in play there.
I see. What are some other struggles for women in motorsport? It doesn't have only to be drivers, but women in motorsports, what are some struggles?
Yeah, I think honestly, it sounds terrible to say, but it's true. I think we still need to change mindsets. I think if you look at motorsport series and the way they market to female fans and male fans is very different. Most series, I think a lot of female fans are treated like they're only there because of the drivers, for example, in Formula One, right? Or because of the allure of the drivers or, just the excitement of the series. I don't think female fans are taken as seriously as male fans. So many men are marketed or targeted towards in a way like, okay, like this is exciting, come work with us. Women are not targeted the same way, unfortunately. And I think that goes in hand with the struggles of women who work in the industry, because I fear to think that maybe they're treated the same way within the industry. I have been lucky enough to talk to some women in the industry, and knock on wood, I've never heard, something like terrible has happened where they felt the need to leave, or where they felt like they're not valued or anything like that. Yes, there are people who, have raised concerns and they've had to make changes, which is great. And I think one example is like marshals. So, there's marshals on track to ensure safety, and there's many women who want to be marshals. And a big challenge for women who were already marshals was the uniform that they were in. And it sounds so silly to say, but like the uniform was not accessible for women to use the bathroom. So they shared that with FIA and the series, and then they worked on a different uniform of women. And now there's more women coming in as marshals because they find it a lot more comfortable. So I think it's just things like that where, we just really need to involve women in the conversation to understand their struggles. It can really come down to small things like the uniform. We didn't even have different race suits for women until a few years ago. Which is so crazy to think about. We have completely different bodies and we don't have tailored race suits, and that can really impact your comfort in a car. And that's one of the most important things, to feel comfortable in a car. So, I think it's small things like that, but we can truly only change if we actually speak to women, include women in the conversations. And I think that involves having both men and women in the same room and having these conversations, because right now we're in a place where most of leadership is men, and that's fine as long as we have some women in the room who can actually help those decisions that can create change.
Yeah, for sure. And you said it's small changes, but I mean, they're big. It makes a big difference. So, like you said, with the race suit, now if that's the only thing, that changing that, and then you have much more the tracksuit, and then you have much more marshals. I mean, what a small price to pay to get more women involved, right?
Exactly. Yeah. No, it's incredible what one small thing can do.
Exactly. Let's talk about females in motorsport. The founder, Helena Hicks, founder and editor-in-chief. So can you talk a little bit about what that is and how you got involved?
Yeah, absolutely. So Females in Motorsport was launched, I want to say now 6 years ago. I hope I'm not getting that wrong. I think it was 6 years ago. And Helena started it, she started it when she was very young. And she's still very young, to be fair. But she started it as, just to spotlight women who are working in the industry. She's always been passionate about Formula One. And she has that drive to really talk about women and share their stories. So it really started as, across social platforms. We, of course, we have a website where we do some editorial work as well. But the main purpose is, and always will be, is to highlight women who are working in the industry. And again, not just to, talk about the struggles, which is equally important, but also to share their expertise, because I think so many times women are not pulled into those conversations, unfortunately, consciously or subconsciously, we just don't think about those things. And that's how, that's the background of Females in Motorsport and what we're really trying to achieve. How I got involved is this is like October, November of last year, and I had reached a point in my fandom in Females in Motorsport is that I was like, where are the women in motorsport? What you were asking me about, if there's a different women's series in Formula One, that was literally my first thought. I thought, oh, there's probably another series, and there wasn't one. So I was very, very intrigued, and I was like, I'm not sure what's going on here. And that's how I started following Females in Motorsport, I think, at the beginning of 2022. And so I was following them. I really admired their work, everything. And then towards the end of the year, I think I just emailed Helena and I was like, hey, I really love the work you guys are doing. And I would love to contribute with some writing for your website, for your blog. So that's how I got started with them. And I think my first, I did a couple of stories, I think in the beginning of 2023. And then I realized that they had stopped doing their podcast a couple of years ago. And when I asked Helena, I think it was more of like a time thing. We had a host who, just couldn't commit to the time. As I'm sure it's a big time commitment.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was like, okay, you know what? I have some time, even though I really did not. But I was like, I have some time. I would love to do this for you. And, just to have, bring some more visibility to Females in Motorsport and really own that part of it. So that's how my journey started. Like, that's what I do now, mostly with Females in Motorsport. My biggest focus is the podcast. And then I'm the only US person in females in motorsport. So I'm lucky enough to be able to attend all the US events as well. So that's my biggest role in females in motorsport. So that's how I really got involved with it. And now I think honestly can't remember a time when it was not part of my life.
Yeah, that's really, really interesting. And I mean, this platform now is reaching millions, and this must also be something that makes a huge difference for female fandom for motorsports and want to engage. And as you said, you got an interest you didn't know, and you found females in motorsports, and that took your fandom even to the next level.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the females in motorsport was instrumental in me following other series, because we cover all kinds of series, and I didn't even know about so many of the series that exist out there. And I've had the privilege to be able to talk to some amazing women who work across different series, and it's really, really inspiring. And I think it's also something that, I honestly I'd never thought I'd do. I'm not somebody who generally likes to hear, my own voice. And, on a podcast, you have to. And it was really something I had to get used to. But, it's just something that I never thought I would be a part of. And being a part of such an important platform that, so many people who work in motorsport are familiar with. And I think, it's really leading the way, I would say, for women in motorsport in terms of, sharing a voice and, being a media platform for them. So it's really been an honor and a privilege, to be honest.
What's some things that you've learned from being the podcast host?
That's a great question. I would say every person who's been on the podcast has had very unique stories of how they got into motorsport. I actually had somebody who is the chief media officer at Formula E, obviously very, very senior. She and I connected in Portland when I was there for the race. Coincidentally, we are literally from the same hometown, which is incredible. And so we couldn't obviously talk for hours and hours. But her background is actually in cricket now, which is obviously huge in India. Cricket is basically religion in India. And that's how she got started in sports. And that's how she, a few years ago was like, okay, what's my next step? And that's how she ventured into Formula E. She wasn't really a motorsport fan before that. She wasn't crazy about it or anything like that. But that's how she got into it. And then I've had, women on the podcast. I've had a creator, she loves Formula One, who's, doing incredible work. She's just really bringing the joy, I would say, in motorsport for so many women. And she has been in motorsport from the day that she's been born, right? Because her father was, in motorsport, and, she's had a very, very intense history around it. So I think it's interesting to hear about different stories of women who've been in, in the industry. And, there is this debate between new fans and old fans of Formula One, which I really hate, because I feel like Formula One is truly the only sport which actually cares about when you got into the sport. When I talk to my friends who watch tennis, I've never been asked the question, when did you start watching tennis? So it's a little bit, it's a little crazy. But I think, with women on the podcast, I think it's nice that I think we are all so excited to have more women in the industry, in the community, which has been really nice to see on the podcast.
I think that when someone asks you how long you have been interested in motorsports, it has to do with the Netflix part again, because it became so mainstream after that. So maybe if you have been a fan of the sport for, let's say, 20 years, then you feel like you're a more, true fan. You've been for the long ride, and now everyone is jumping on the train.
Yeah, that's actually what it is. I find it so confusing because I'm like, don't you want more people to like what you're liking? So it's a little bit confusing to me personally, but to each their own, I guess. But yeah, I love meeting new people, who've been in the industry for 20 years, who watched it for 20 years, who've been in there for who've been watching it for 5 races. I don't care. I'm happy to, speak with anybody in the industry. But unfortunately, it's not the case for everybody.
We have talked about Formula One and Formula E a lot. It's 2023. You talk about sustainability. Formula One has a big carbon print. Everyone knows that. It's not only the cars, but it's also, traveling around the world, bringing all this equipment and everything with. So that is something that Formula E has as an advantage. They're trying to cut on that carbon print. Is that what you would say is one of the drivers for why fans lean towards Formula E? Or also, you said before, it's very exciting, a lot of overtakes, but how big part does the sustainability aspect play in this?
Yeah, I think sustainability, I think it definitely plays a role. When you think of Formula One, you think of loud engines and fast cars. You don't think of sustainability at all, even though they have a big sustainability program and they have some lofty goals they're trying to meet by 2030, which is great to see. And, of course, now Formula One is also hybrid engines. So, they're creeping their way in. Formula E, of course, I think has really been leading the way along with Extreme E, I would say, in bringing that sustainability messaging forward. And I do think that it's hard to say if fans are getting into the sport because of that, but I do think they really respect that. I think there's a lot of people who salute Formula E to be able to do that, especially in single seaters, because, travel logistics is going to be part of any series. You have to travel. Formula E travels. But the way they've cut it down is they have a lot of double headers. So, you're not taking flights for every race. Sometimes there's 2 races in the same weekend in the same circuit. So you're cutting down that travel logistics part by half. So I know it's exciting to watch. I would love to watch, actually, if you think about it, the same circuit twice in a row to see if it's the same driver who wins, if it's a different driver. So I think it's interesting to watch. I think with the sustainability part, I think Formula E still has some way to go to market it and, for people to be able to understand how it works and everything. Because I think there's not that much understanding about it yet. And I think a lot of motorsport fans who've been watching Formula One might not understand the impact of sustainability on Formula E because Formula One has their own sustainability program. So, it's kind of like a balancing act to see like which one do you think is more sustainable? Does that really matter? Most fans, I would say, are probably watching both series, if not, just Formula One. So, like for me, example, I watch both series. And I have a lot of respect for Formula E in terms of sustainability and what they're doing. And they're really, really bringing a lot of changes every single year, which is incredible to be able to find that innovation. They have some amazing partners who are literally leaders in the electric industry. And I do think that, it's becoming a bigger concern. It is a very real problem that the world is dealing with. And it's becoming a bigger concern. And I think it's going to become a bigger part of why fans get into it in the future. I don't know if we're there yet, but I think 5-10 years from now, I think it's going to make a very big impact.
I agree with you. What is some advice you would give women who wants to pursue a career in motorsports?
I don't know if I'm the best person to give advice, but I have received some great advice, which I'd love to share, is that, seize any and every opportunity because, motorsport is a very, very fast-paced industry. Things come and go so quickly. Seize every opportunity you have. Be as proactive as possible and network. I think networking is huge in motorsport. Females in motorsport is a platform where I've had, the opportunity to meet so many people. And everybody has been so willing to be helpful. And I've had so many people on the podcast through other people on the podcast. So I think networking is huge and just, making sure, and I think that kind of goes hand in hand with seizing every opportunity. You meet someone, you respect, you admire, go up to them, have a conversation with them because, you will be surprised how many, especially women in the industry, are willing to help you out because they want more women in the industry too.
Has there been any bumps on the road in your career so far? And if so, how did you overcome them?
I guess, just working in motorsport, of course, the bumps have been just working around like the news cycle of motorsport is so hard because literally things change. They can change over a minute or two. So, it gets very fast paced. And of course, just balancing a full-time job with the podcast has been a little bit challenging, but I'm not complaining because it's something that I really love to do and I'm really passionate about. So it's a good kind of busy, I would say. Sometimes I'm like, how am I feel like I have not slept in like a year, but all good things. But I think generally, the bumps have always been, of course, to just navigate the industry. I'm new to the industry. And it's Formula One and motorsport is a sport that is very technical to watch. If you look at, for example, basketball, the aim, the goal of the sport, it moves around very quickly. Soccer, football, you know what's happening. And I think motorsport is a little bit of a learning curve And especially when you start getting into the industry, just being able to navigate all those things and work around all those, different technical aspects, especially for someone like me who's so new to the sport, has been a little bit challenging. But again, like I was saying, people have been so helpful in helping me, understand all the levels and layers of the sport that it's been really helpful.
Approaching the end here, is there something I haven't asked you yet that you feel is important to mention?
I don't think so. I think the only thing I would say is that for anybody, who's listening and is a motorsport fan or just a Formula One fan, just like watches one series, I would say the biggest learning that I've had is to watch other series. I think it's so interesting to see how other people are doing things and, taking, cues from other people. And I think, like we were talking about Formula E, for example, like Formula E is doing so well with creators. They always invite creators to their races and, things like that. And I got to know about Formula E through another content creator. So I think, just looking at that is something that I always think like, Formula One should really be doing this. I mean, not like they need more people, but I think, the way that the series is going, they might have a drop off. So just to keep fans engaged. I think if anybody who wants to work in the industry, I would say, just keep your pulse on all motorsport because, your learnings from different series can really help determine your knowledge and your expertise in the industry.
I like that. The last question that I ask everyone is, who from your network would you think would be a good guest on this podcast?
Oh, absolutely. Aarti, who I was talking about before, who's the chief media officer at Formula E. Oh my God, I'm obsessed with her brain. She has so much expertise, so much knowledge around sport because she has been, in cricket. She's been in motorsport now. She's broken through an industry. She's South Asian and, motorsport is not really one that at least I have not seen a lot of South Asian women. She has a lot of expertise in navigating those kind of pitfalls. So that was such an easy answer for me because I'm so inspired by her journey.
That would be an amazing guest.
Yeah.
Manvi, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the Sports Management Podcast.
Thank you so much, Marcus, for having me. I'm so glad we were able to connect and make this work. And like I was saying, I feel like you've had some amazing guests on the podcast. I'm genuinely so honored to be here and just talk about females in motorsport and women who work in the industry. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you for listening to the Sports Management Podcast. Please hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on any upcoming episodes. Also, feel free to leave a comment about what you thought about this episode. If you want to get in contact with me, send an email to sportsmpodcast@gmail.com or hit me up on Facebook, Twitter or Instagram @sportmpodcast.